everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I'm here to do more stabby reviews, so that is horror thrillers and maybe some true crime. And in this video I am going to talk about a lot of new releases as well as a couple backlist titles, so lots of new buzzy books that I have opinions on. And I want to talk about a particular backlist book that was such a page turner, so if you're in a reading slump, if you need something to just fly through, I have a great recommendation for you today. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk horror, starting with Just Like Mother by Heltzel. This is one I received for review from Tor Nightfire. This follows a woman who as a child was pulled into a cult, and thankfully she was able to escape. As an adult, she's trying to move on in her life, but she's gotten the chance to reconnect with one of her childhood best friends who she knew during her time in the cult. Her friend, you find out, has a new wildly successful business that has made her very wealthy, that essentially deals with like fertility and all of that. And her, as the main character, she is someone who is purposely childless by choice, and so you get to see kind of how that interplays within their relationship. Of course, this is a horror book, so assume that terrible things are going to ensue, and I have quite a few things to say about this one, so let's get started. First off, I will say that for the most part, most of this book read like a thriller, which is something I've kind of been complaining about this year in horror. However, it takes a couple turns that definitely made it in the horror category for me. There's definitely some nods to Rosemary's Baby, given the fact that this book deals with pregnancy and things like that, and I really enjoy Rosemary's Baby, and I love books that give an homage to that classic story. In terms of the storytelling itself, it was very fast-paced, it was easy to follow, and it did take me a while to get invested in the story, but like I said, once it turned from thriller to horror, I was definitely in. And I'm someone who really likes books that challenge the classic ideas or themes around motherhood. The idea is that in order to be fulfilled with our lives, we need to be mothers. Obviously, I am a mother, but I also really will fervently fight for my friends that are childless by choice. So I did really like that this book was setting up a lot of really interesting and detailed conversations around it. However, while I enjoyed a lot of this book, I do have some gripes, and that's the fact that this book dealt with a lot of these really important thematic ideas, but then in my mind, the author then took some easy roads out and ended up playing into a lot of stereotypes surrounding motherhood and consent and various issues, and the way that they were handled just felt like a cop-out, because this author could have made some really great strides in terms of modern literature, and instead they just kind of backpedaled and made some twists and turns that just reinforce stereotypes that really personally bother me. So I do want to recommend this book to those of you that just enjoy a good thriller, that love Rosemary's Baby. I do think that there's a lot to love, and I do think a lot of people are really going to enjoy this. I did enjoy it, but I do have those stickler points that really took the book down a notch for me. So it went from a book that I thought I would love, that ended up being a book that was one I liked, but had problems in my mind. Next up, we have Black Tides by Casey Jones, and this is another Tor Nightfire review copy. And this is a very short cosmic horror story that follows two individuals that meet on the beach one day. They decide to have a one-night stand, and then they potentially find out that the world is possibly going to end. This book thematically started out brilliantly. I love the prologue, and I do not like the prologues in pretty much any book, but I actually thought that it had some really beautiful ideas that it was exploring. The way it was written, the prose, all of that, I thought was actually really beautiful. I like the kind of thematic idea of having a one-night stand at the end of the world is ending, let's just spend it together. I think is very romantic as a concept, and so I liked those beginning elements. However, as the story went on, the characters started to grate on me. They turned from likable to kind of annoying, and I'm just not a huge fan of cosmic horror, so when things got really epic in scale and when the story turned very action-based, it did kind of lose my interest, and I'll be honest, I didn't love this one. Again, I think if you like those setups, if you like that subgenre, you'll probably like this one a lot more than I did. I thought it had a lot of good potential, but it didn't really work out for me. Next up, we have Hide by Kiersten White, and this is a book that follows a young woman who signs up for a contest which involves surviving in an amusement park. And this is a book that I would describe as kind of a take on something like The Hunger Games. And And it's a setup for a book that is just going to be all nonstop action, and I kind of knew from the setup that it wasn't going to be a book I would love, just because I do tend to enjoy more slower paced, character-driven books these days. However, I was surprised how much I dislike this book. So first off, I picked up this book because I've read other books by this author before. Normally they write young adult books, but I tend to really enjoy those books, and so I was hoping to enjoy this one as well. I'm actually glad several people in a previous video I did where I talked about YA tropes mentioned this book, and they told me that this book was marketed as adult, which really surprised me, and I think I actually corrected a few people incorrectly in the comments, so sorry about that. You were right, this book is marketed as their adult debut. I do not know why, because this book is just about a whole bunch of young people and it read like YA, which I don't criticize a book for reading like YA if it's marketed that way, but if it's marketed as adult, I expect it to read differently. That being said, I just didn't really enjoy this book because with a book like this, it's all about the action and it should be all about the characters. And so if a book is all about watching the characters slowly get whittled down to the final few, you have to care about the characters. And I did not care about anyone. I found them to be very flat and uninteresting, and I did not care. And again, the other part of this book was the action. This book is nonstop. It's very short, you will fly through it, but despite that, it's not the kind of story that I really love. It's very forgettable for me, and perhaps would work better as a movie than a story, but for me, I don't see the hype. I thought it was a big miss, and I really didn't like it, so personally wouldn't recommend it. I don't know why it was marketed as adult horror. If someone can explain that to me, do let me know, because yeah, it's becoming a gripe of mine that things are just getting shoved in the adult category for no apparent reason, it seems. Next up, we have Aurora by David Koepp, and this is another one I received for review. This is a thriller with minor science fiction elements, but more thriller than sci-fi, which is why it's in this video and not my SFF content. Essentially, we follow a small town where the power is knocked out by a solar event, and then we follow a group of individuals who have to survive during that blackout. And apparently this is based off of a real event, or rather the idea for the solar incident was based off of something that actually happened historically, but that was set back in a time where there actually wasn't a lot of electronic technology. So now they kind of explored what would happen if there was another solar event, now that we rely so heavily on power to run our lives. So I do think in terms of a premise, it was actually a really cool idea. I like the fact that it was based off of something that did actually happen in a different lifetime and all that. But in terms of a book, this is similar to my feelings on the last one. Basically, it's a book where you have to care about the characters, and I once again found the characters to be very flat and uninteresting. I just did not care what happened to them. And again, it's a book that's very action-based, so you're just kind of moving through the story. It felt like more of a movie than a book. I've heard that this one might get adapted, and I just don't think it's a kind of book that I personally enjoy reading, so this one was just not to my taste. If you love just like an action-packed thriller that's just about people getting by in a difficult situation, maybe this one will be more to your taste, but I just didn't really find it very interesting, if I'm honest. Next up, we have Take Your Breath Away by Linwood Barclay. This is another book I received for review. This is a thriller that is told over two timelines, one being the past, where we follow a man whose wife has disappeared. As the husband, he is the main suspect. However, there really isn't enough evidence to actually convict him of anything, so he's allowed to continue on and live his life. Years later, a woman shows up who possibly is his wife, and it sounds like she has been found, and so the story basically goes from there, exploring that. Now, this is a book, again, that sounds like it has a really cool concept, and in reality, I found this book to be incredibly boring and uninteresting. So given the setup like that, it's kind of surprising just how weak I feel like the characters were, and the way that the plot was set up just did not live up to that synopsis for me. So I'll be honest, I really did not enjoy this one. I found it a pain to read because I was not enjoying the experience, and it was very, very forgettable. I really struggled to summarize it for you all now, just because it's a book that I read for review and then moved on to something else. So fortunately, a miss for me. Next up, we have I Am Pilgrim by Terry Hayes, and this is like a really buzzy thriller that came out a while back that I feel like everyone was reading in the airports for a couple of years. This story is a really unique one to summarize because you kind of bring together a few different pieces and fragments of a story that kind of build into something slowly. I don't want to give away too much. Basically, we start the story with finding out about this woman who has been murdered in a hotel, and the way that the murder has taken place and the evidence has been hidden is just very unique and odd. You know something is not right. We follow a man who has previously worked as a spy, and he is called back into service in order to deal with a terrorist who has come on the loose. And you basically follow all of these events happening, and slowly you find out how the past and present all pull together into this really epic, exciting political thriller. Now, normally while I read a lot of thrillers on my channel, I normally gravitate towards more like domestic psychological thrillers, kind of the buzzy kind of housewife thrillers, you would say. But I actually don't read a lot of the more traditional action-based thrillers, which are traditionally, again, more of a men's genre. But this is one that I think has been recommended to me over the past several years. It's just people saying this book is so gripping, you should check it out. Again, I've seen it online, it's pretty buzzy. I feel like it's, again, one of those books that you see in like an airport bookshop. And I finally checked it out because I'll be honest, after reading some of those other thrillers, I was kind of in a slumpy mood. I needed to finish out this video with some more books. And so I picked this one up, and oh man, it was the right book at the right time. So if you can't tell, this is the book I was referencing at the beginning of the video that was such a page turner. My copy, a mass market paperback, was almost over 800 pages, but I found myself flying through the pages. I read it incredibly quickly because it's just the kind of book it is. Again, I just think it's the kind of book where you're just trying to like figure out what's going on in the story and try to piece everything together, and the action and the narrative just keep moving. And there's something I just really enjoy about a story that has a lot of propulsive movement like that. You'll hear me talk a lot about narrative, and I am someone who's very picky about how my narrative is written. So you can have a really cool story, but the way it is executed will very largely affect my reading enjoyment of it. So this one, in terms of structure and setup, was all there for me. Possibly could some of it have been edited down? I would say yes. Towards the end, there were some sections that I didn't really see why they were necessary. But again, it was such a fast read despite the length that I really can't complain too much. The one thing I do want to recognize is that the terrorist is of Middle Eastern descent, and this book does play into a lot of stereotypes. I am not a political major, and this really isn't my area, but I do suspect that there's probably some problematic content within this book, just given the fact that they're playing into some very touchy subject matter. So keep that all in mind. I don't want to over-endorse something that does have troubling potential problems, but as a story, it was so compelling. It was exactly what I needed. If you're in a reading slump this summer when the weather gets hot, I know I often fall into that trap. I highly recommend picking up something like this. You will fly through it. It's an easy beach read, if these are the kind of beach reads that you like to read, because they're basically mine. I highly recommend this one. I did think that as a story, it was so compelling, and yeah, I can't stop thinking about it. Finally, I want to talk about Bone Deep, which is a true crime book that follows a man who comes home to find out that his wife has been murdered. He calls the police, and unfortunately he is pinned as the main suspect in that murder despite having an alibi for the evening. They still believe he had time to come home, murder her, clean himself up, and call the police in that time frame. However, within the book you find out that there is another suspect involved, and that person should have been a more obvious suspect, but instead the police just really narrowed their focus to the husband, and justice was almost not served. So this is a really interesting book to pick up for those of you that like to explore books where the police get it wrong and really go after the wrong suspect. I did find the beginning especially very compelling because I could imagine myself being in their shoes, being that spouse that is being accused of these terrible things. So I did find this book very compelling. The case, I should say, is very compelling. The book narrative is not the best. I will say this book is very repetitive, especially in the section where we get to the trial, where you have the facts and evidence of the case repeated over and over again. And I also have this tiny little gripe that this book goes over and above explaining how D&D works, or Dungeons and Dragons, and it explains it in such terms that it's clearly written for an audience that has never ever heard of this role-playing game, which in this day and age seems a little bit weird. That being said, I did find it fascinating to find out who was actually behind all this. It was nice to have a case that is closed, so by the time you finish the book, you will have a really good idea of what actually happened to this poor woman and the victim. So I do think it's, again, a very interesting book that studies an almost mistake of justice, but As story itself, I do think the book is weak, but if you're interested in the case, this is one way to check it out. There might be podcasts or other ways to read about it. So if you do have recommendations for a podcast that maybe covers this case better than this book, love to hear about it. But yeah, still fascinating and yeah, terrifying to be in those shoes when someone is pointing a finger at you for something you have not done. So yeah, that was interesting for sure. So that's it for this video here. I would love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning to check out? Which ones are you planning to skip? I would also love a recommendation for a page turner, particularly a thriller that you think I should read this summer. I'm just in the mood for those books that you just fly through. I'm not going on any plane trips, but I kind of want those type of books. So if you have anything that is like I Am Pilgrim, love to know. I'm also thinking about checking out The Da Vinci Code, which I've never read. I don't know if I've seen the movie, I can't remember. But if you think that one would be up my alley, I would love to hear feedback. And if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror thrillers, true crime, as well as adult science fiction and fantasy. If you want to help me out, you can give this video a thumbs up, share it around online, drop a little emoji, even if it's just a little, I don't know, detective or a knife. I don't know, I've got to think of better emojis for my stabby videos. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.